Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and we need to talk about audiobooks. A few days ago, in my subscriptions, I saw a short little video from a booktuber who went on a rant about how audiobooks are not reading. His view was a little pedantic, in my opinion. He was on the very strict opinion that listening to an audiobook is not reading because you are listening to the words and not reading the words. And that he says, yes, you can absorb and understand a book, but it is not on audio, but it is not the same as reading the book. And he went on to comment that how could someone do a book review by just listening to the audiobook? And this is a theme that runs through booktube quite often. There are some people who have a very steadfast opposition to audiobooks, and they go through all sorts of gimmicks and, holding things up and say, this is reading because you read words, this is listening because you hear it through your ears, and the reading is so much more better than the listening. And that's a very narrow point of view, in my opinion. If you listen to an audiobook, if you read a book, it is essentially the same activity. You are absorbing information from a text that an author wrote. It really does not matter if you're hearing the text or reading the text, or if you're blind, reading the text with your fingers on Braille. It is all absorbing the book. You can read the book. You can listen to the book. You can grok the book if you want to go all Robert Heinlein on it. It is essentially the same thing. Now, some audiobooks are more suitable to the audio format, and some written books are more suitable to the written word. I can come up with The House of Leaves by Danielewski. And yes, that book, just because of the way it is written and the text is on the page, it would not work as an audiobook. But other books work just fine as audiobooks. There are even some books that exist only as audiobooks or ebooks, because people complain about ebooks like they would complain about audiobooks. The definitive edition of Solaris by Stanislav Lem was for many years only available as an audiobook. And that is because the print version of that book was translated not from the Polish, but from the French. And due to copyright reasons, they weren't able to retranslate it as a print book, but it was able to be published as an audio book. So if someone wanted the definitive edition of Lem's Solaris, that person would have to listen to it as an audio book. And that is an advantage the audio book had over the print book. But still, it's a pedantic way to try to define reading, listening, and separating them out. As I said, it is essentially the same thing. If I listen to an audiobook, I will understand it just as well as I did if I read the print book, with few exceptions like House of Leaves. And I have been listening to audiobooks since 1997. I have listened to 1,034 audiobooks. And that is more books than most people will read in a lifetime. And how much richer is my life from having read those books? And yes, I can interchange listening to an audiobook and reading an audiobook. I don't have a problem. I don't want to be that school marmish person that says, oh no, it's not reading because you listen to it. It is the same. I've absorbed the book. I understand the book. It is the same. Now going back, how many people have read 1,334 books in a lifetime? Very few. If you give an average of 10 hours per audiobook, that is 10,000 hours of listening. That would make me a master of books. The idea is that if you are a musician, you don't become truly skilled until 10,000 hours of practice. Well, I have 10,000 hours of practice listening to audiobooks. So maybe you can consider me a master of that subject. And I say it is absolutely just fine to listen or to read audiobooks. You will absorb it just as well as reading it. And for the people who don't like it, well, okay, you don't like it. Maybe that is just a skill you don't have yet. I started in 1997 when I was given an unabridged cassette group of George Orwell's 1984. It was given to me by a friend who was a manager in a bookstore, and it was a gift for helping him move. I was supposed to trade that in at the bookstore for store credit, but for whatever reason, I couldn't get credit because that book wasn't carried. So I listened to it, and that changed my reading life. Ever since then, I have been absolutely devoted to audiobooks. And my life is much richer for that action. Now, how do I listen to these? Well, in the old days, it was only when I was commuting to and from work. I had an hour commute each way. Those audiobooks brought that hour each way to something useful. That's what, going back and forth, that's 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day of wasted time. What could I be doing in those 2 hours? Well, okay, maybe I could be listening to some music. All right, music is fine, but I don't consider it as good as listening to an audiobook. And over time, I started walking more. And you can listen to your audiobook when you walk. I force myself to walk at least half hour to an hour every day because it is very healthy to walk. And when I get up in the morning, I'm eager to go on my walk because I've got a book waiting for me that I can listen to. And it is one of the highlights of my day. Now, what I do not do is sit down on a chair and just listen. When I'm sitting down, I pick up a physical book or I pick up my Kindle and read that way. But when I'm doing something else, when I'm driving, when I'm walking, when I'm doing the dishes, the audiobook is the way to go. That reclaims time that's just spent uselessly into something very productive. And maybe the people who hate audiobooks are trying to sit there and just listen. Well, why don't you get an audiobook from the library? Start with something that you know that you love, one of your favorite books. Load it onto your phone and start listening and go for a walk. I think that would be a very productive use of your time. And if you really don't like it, well, then you don't like it. But don't denigrate people who find value and get value out of reading or listening to audiobooks. It is not a substandard way to absorb a book. And that's all I'm going to have to say. Peace.